Welcome to our webinar. Today is our inaugural End Digital Poverty Day. So we're really excited about the programme of events that we have happening here on the 12th of September 2023, if you're watching on the YouTube recording later. We have today Matt Adam from We Are Digital, and he is going to be talking about the fact that we believe, but it's a question, is universal internet access becoming an essential human right? So we're going to dive into that in a moment. For those of you who aren't aware of what we do here at the Digital Poverty Alliance, we are a charitable coalition. So we bring together business, big and small, government, be that national or local, and charities, whether they're national or community-led, to look for positive solutions to solving digital poverty once and for all in a sustainable way by the end of the decade. And our awareness day today, End Digital Poverty Day, is all around how we can grow that understanding of how important internet access is, but also about the millions of people across the UK who are living in some form of digital deprivation. I'm delighted to introduce Matt, who I'm going to hand over to just say a little bit about who he is and what We Are Digital does.
Yes, thanks, Elizabeth. Hi, everyone. Really nice to be here. Thank you for everyone that's come along. So We Are Digital. We are a social impact business, so very much like a social enterprise. So we're a tech for good company. We're one of the fastest growing social enterprises in the UK. So we're trying to bring as much impact to the sector as we can. In terms of what we do, so we're a provider of large-scale community programs. So some of that is digital skills and digital inclusion, which I'm sure we'll talk a lot about today. We also run other types of community and welfare services, so things like money and debt advice, employability boot camps, things like that. And we do it through an end-to-end model that we've developed. That essentially, easiest way of describing it is it brings everything under one roof, from a referral coming in to booking to the great organizations we use on the ground to support people, all the way through to reporting, funding and impact measurement as well, under a welfare technology platform that we've developed. So yes, that's us, and really good to be here.
Fantastic. Thank you, Matt. We'd also love to hear from everyone who's listening. So do pop it in the chat, who you are, what organisation you're from, whereabouts in the country or indeed the world you may be. And we love to see that chat kicking off with people exchanging views and ideas. We will also, if we've got time later, be taking questions from attendees for Matt. So do use the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of the Zoom video screen, so we can keep a track on all of those. So Matt, we are talking today about universal internet access, whether that's an essential human right. What does it mean for people to have universal access?
Yeah, I think it's a big question. I think it's talked about a lot in the sector when we go to various conferences and meetings. And to me, I guess universal internet access means all people having access to the internet, regardless of their economic status, their location, or any characteristics, demographics, or kind of local or community factors, really. So ensuring that there are no barriers, and as the name suggests, it's universal. So, that could mean free public Wi-Fi. It could be affordable home internet plans. I'm sure we'll get on to things like social tariffs. It may be, I think sometimes, a lot of the conversation is steered, quite rightly, I guess, to the cost for people in need. But I think there are many other reasons why individuals may be excluded from internet access. So it can also be geographically based. If you live in a black spot or very poor signal, I'm sure lots of people have had experience with that. So again, whether it's the cheaper satellite providers now that are spreading around, but essentially it's so everyone can have access to the same information, the same opportunities, educational, economic, social resources that the internet provides. People may have heard some of the stats that the United Nations is looking by 2030, which isn't that long away in a way, for everyone, every person on the planet should have safe and affordable access to the internet. So that's the way they describe it, safe and affordable, which I think is quite interesting, because there's a sort of online safety element to that as well. And that's one of the sustainable development goals. As an organization, we work towards 4 or 5 of the SDGs, as they're called, sustainable development goals. So it's very important. But I think maybe just last point on that side is sometimes the access issue can be misleading. I think it's not just the access. I'm sure a lot of organizations that work in the community that are online today for this webinar will realize that lots of other factors are involved. So there's the motivational piece, if someone actually wants to get onto the internet. There's the safety piece. A lot of individuals are quite scared when they read about hacks and safety issues online, and income and other characteristics as well. So I think there's the devices that I know the DPA gets very involved with, and the training and skills. So it's a very wide agenda when you think about just the access piece, really, is what we would say.
Absolutely. And the DPA talks about these 5 determinants or factors of digital poverty, and actually devices and connectivity we put together as just one of those 5. It is a massively complex issue. But the affordability of connectivity is such a massive barrier for those who are offline due to low income. Apart from that, which individuals and communities do you think are most impacted by lack of connectivity?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very long list, I would say. So we've run digital and financial inclusion programs for 10 years or more now, with many housing associations in the main, councils, local authorities, and we do it through, I should say, a network of fantastic third sector organizations, advice centers, libraries, citizens advice, and so forth. I see a few are on today, which is great. And I think through that supply chain of organizations, we see a lot of deprivation around the lack of connectivity. So just to name a few, we see really it can affect anyone, so all generations. I think there's sometimes a bit of a cliche of an older person in a rural black spot that can't get onto the internet. Of course that exists, but I think it's very wide reaching now. It's almost like I think there has to be maybe a slightly updated modern definition of digital exclusion and lack of internet access, because it's quite multifaceted now. So yes, I think low income families, we support a lot of families who maybe suffer from the poverty premium, which is where people who have lower incomes can sometimes be charged more or unfairly for goods and services. So that could be pay as you go, non-monthly contract, maybe not being able to pay by direct debit, being on more expensive plans. I think that comes up a lot for low-income families. We've seen it very starkly with school children and the education sector. I think COVID showed what was called the homework gap, where if you didn't have access to the internet, or good, fast access to the internet, it was actually much more difficult to do work, homework and schoolwork, once you were home with your family. That also had a massive connection to the devices. And I know the DPA did a lot of great work with the laptop schemes during COVID as well. I mean, I've got 2 young daughters at primary school. They still require, to this day, even post-COVID, a tablet and various, school apps that are needed. And again, I think our take would be it's not always good enough just to think, well, we can hand out, secondhand refurbished devices that are maybe quite slow, maybe don't work very well. We're big believers that regardless of income level or location or demographic, everyone should be able to have a high quality device, high quality internet access that's affordable. The way the internet's going nowadays, with the amount of bandwidth you need, even what used to be a fairly standard broadband speed isn't often enough for some of the families we see that share that connection. I think rural exclusion is a big one. We work across the UK, and you may live in a black spot. Maybe there's no fiber to the property, which is some of the fastest internet you can get nowadays. Some people may still be hotspotting onto their phone using data. It can be very, very tricky in certain rural locations where the Openreach and BT rollout hasn't perhaps reached yet. I think there's also a piece on healthcare. So we see that quite a lot, that there's the rise of, telehealth services, checking in on elderly parents, lots of devices, the Internet of Things, so much is powered now from the healthcare side of things in your own home, especially for those that are maybe physically or, mentally impaired in some way. And so there's lots of very positive, impactful devices, but a lot of it, well, nearly all of it, relies on the internet. And then probably lastly, I'd say what we would call citizen services. So we run a lot of what's termed assisted digital programs for central government. So for the Home Office, Courts and Tribunal Service. And this is basically where the central government is going digital by default, increasingly now, like many organizations around the world. So whether it's a visa form or, you have to do probate or whatever it may be, there's normally a form you have to do online on gov.uk. It's all moving away from paper forms, your passports, pretty much every type of government service is going digital by default. But again, if you lack devices, if you lack the skills, if you lack access to good quality internet, participating in those government citizen services can be very tricky indeed.
Absolutely, Matt, and that resonates so much with what we say. And in fact, if we look at what's going on at the moment with schools, and those schools that have had to close parts because of the concrete crisis, you're seeing kids being sent home to learn online. And of course, there is that underlying assumption that, one, there'll be a device. Well, okay, maybe schools can loan a device, but then there's the connection to be used at home by the family. Where do you access the broadband? Where do you access mobile data? And this absolutely plays to the need for a sustainable solution that isn't purely focused around donated devices and donated data. Actually, how do we solve the issue? Much as actually those donated devices and data are changing lives for people right now, but what's the sort of ongoing solution? And we feel like the cost of living crisis has had a major impact actually on families' abilities, and that almost digital poverty is getting worse rather than better. Would you agree with that? Has that impacted on the people that you work with and their ability to get online?
Yeah, I think there's no bones about it. I think cost of living, is causing, huge turbulence and difficulties for families across the UK. We run quite a few sort of money advice, money guidance programs, and yes, we've seen all of the calls into our programs spiking. Our community partners say the same thing, and I think there's a massive crossover between the digital and financial inclusion side on this. So yes, I think sadly, cost of living, there's a bit of debate around is cost of living about sort of access to services, or is it about income and the money side? I think on balance, it's mostly related to income, but there's a massive part that digital has to play in that. So yes, I think it has got slightly worse with cost of living. I mean, there's quite a bit of debate at the moment amongst policymakers in government and some of the telco providers, and some of the organizations on the ground, to say that really internet access and connectivity could be or should be seen as a basic human right. And even perhaps the fourth utility. There's quite a few campaigns about that at the moment, alongside gas, electric and water. In the UK, for instance, you're not legally allowed to cut someone's water supply off, regardless of unpaid bills and debts and arrears and so forth. Could we say the same for the internet, perhaps in time, given its importance? And I think the numbers speak for themselves. I mean, in the last year, when the harshest amount of cost of living changes happened, Citizens Advice put some stats out showing that 1 million people in the UK actually disconnected their broadband, which I thought was an unbelievable statistic. So yeah, I think the cost of living, is having far-reaching implications. We speak to a lot of community partners that are saying there's nothing more to cut, sadly. So the families are stopping almost everything in terms of the bills and their outgoings, whether it's, Netflix, Sky subscriptions, things like that. We actually think, my personal opinion is it's quite sad, because I think you need the basic sort of connections and basic rights in life, but also, regardless of income level, you should be allowed some joy and, in your life as well. And actually having to cut all these things out is very tricky. And then, yes, a lot of people moving away from those monthly direct debits or slightly more costly monthly plans, going to pay as you go, which in the long run can be more expensive. But that, again, we think it's from the cost of living. I don't think anything has actually come out yet that's proven that link, but it seems very likely. And in a survey recently, more than half of the UK said that the cost of living was having a negative impact, on lots of things, from paying the bills to the internet access to their mental health and so forth. So yes, I think it's definitely having a far-reaching effect. I think just coming back to one of the previous points, I think what we see in our community programs that we deliver across the UK is that, and our third sector partners are saying this to us as well, that it's rarely just the internet access in a silo. So it often has to be paired with training and skills for people. That's on the digital inclusion side. Also the devices, as is talked about a lot. So some of the data banks and the device banks and some of those schemes that are happening out there are great. But I think our take is that what we're not seeing yet is that the three pillars of digital inclusion, if you like, has always been skills, internet access, and the technology, the devices. But it needs to be managed, we think, in a more sort of joined up way. We see some great programs out there, but they're often doing one or two of those three things. So it's brilliant. But when we speak to people on the ground, there's often, let's say, inefficiencies and difficulties because it's not attached to all three at the same time or managed under one roof or one number. It's quite fragmented. So that's the sort of thing we're spending a lot of time at We Are Digital thinking about. How can we join all that together and kind of manage it as one?
And it's so challenging to find these joined up solutions. And as I think I saw somebody on the chat say, it's not just digital poverty, it's poverty. But actually, I would often argue that digital poverty almost sits beneath other forms of poverty, because actually you can find cheaper deals online, you can access training online, you can access support online, you can access benefits online, you can apply for jobs online. Take the online away, and actually a lot of those mechanisms to improve your living situation are actually completely inaccessible to you, which is a strange world that we've now created largely post-pandemic. Matt, how do you think we can reduce that divide between those who have the access to the internet and those who don't?
Yeah, it's a very big question, because there's thousands of amazing programs going on out there, and I've just been reading some of the comments on the chat, and it looks like a lot of the people here today running good programs as well. I think it's not an easy thing to solve overnight. Arguably this has been going on for decades, and we're closer to a solution, and lots of people have been helped and impacted, but it does seem to still be quite fragmented. So that's, we try and sit as a little bit of a sponge nationally, working with all these local community partners and trying to step back and actually thinking, we focus quite on the how rather than the what. So actually, are these programs kind of set up in the most efficient and impactful way? So yes, I think our take would be, and there'll be other opinions as well, I'm sure, that we believe in an integrated approach where you have, it's a bit like a spider's web, we see it as, Elizabeth. So, you have the devices, you have the skills issue, you have physical centers everywhere, you have trainers, you have different channels of need. Some people want to be helped over video, some people want to pop into the local library, some people want to have a telephone call. It's very, very varied. That's probably the number one thing we've seen across the UK, is a huge variety of shapes and sizes of programs around this issue. I completely agree with whoever on the chat said that it's just poverty. That's why we also think that this is related to financial poverty, money and debts, money guidance, mental health. We work with a lot of food bank providers, energy programs. There's 5 or 6 probably core things that are related to this. So yes, I think our take really, and what we're trying to help with in the sector is there a way to bring all of those great things under one roof? Because we get a lot of feedback from users and individuals on the ground that they in a slightly weird way, they're often saying to us that there's almost too much help out there and they don't know where to go. And they're kind of pushed from pillar to post. And it's like, well, do you call that number over there for that organization? And do you have to go in there to sign up for that program? So yeah, we're a big believer in one of the ways we think we can reduce the divide is to bring things together under one roof so that all those organizations can kind of work as one. So we've actually developed a platform that can help to do that. And it continues on with all the great organizations that are doing their work. It's not displacing any of that, but it just helps to join it together. Obviously, you know, this issue in the sector requires significant funding. You know, government and taxpayers ultimately, I think, have a big part to play in that. You know, many brilliant councils and housing associations across the UK do fund a lot of this as well for their local residents and local citizens. I know the DPA have put a delivery plan out. So we think, you know, there's almost like a universal business case of why sectors should fund solutions like this. And, you know, just a few other little bits and pieces, I think it's almost impossible, we've found, when we work on a community program of this nature or it's very unlikely, shall we say, that when a person shows they have a need, that's their only issue. You know, human behavior and society just doesn't work like that nowadays. You know, you're not going to solve someone's internet connectivity issue and then find out that their income and debts and mental health is all absolutely fine. It's very connected. So we think we have to sort of stop this system of expecting people with multiple issues to go to multiple places and have multiple solutions. So that's why, again, we're trying to kind of bring it all together. Mentioned about education and training. I think I saw someone else on the chat say that. Yes, completely agree. You know, we've trained tens of thousands of individuals on digital inclusion over the years, and there's the safety aspects, there's the knowing what to do. We see a lot of programs with devices and data giveaways where something hasn't been put in place to actually set people up, you know, to get them going. So I think that comes up a lot. And just to maybe finish on a couple of small ones, well, quite large issues, but one would be the geographic exclusion. So we're seeing now, led by some companies like Elon Musk's Starlink, where the satellite providers that used to be very, very slow and very, very expensive have now come down in price and gone up in speed massively. You know, when you look at nearly about a third of the planet, about 3 billion people don't have the internet still. And there's lots of places in the UK that would benefit from low cost satellite. So I think there's the geographic side to think about. And then just lastly on social tariffs, this is talked about a lot. There's a bit of a debate at the moment of the take up. So a lot of the telcos are saying to us that, you know, they're you know, let's say some do a better job than others, but of those that do promote the social tariffs quite heavily, I think there is an issue with promotion and needs to be more well understood. You know, we've been working with the Bread and Butter thing recently, who are a fantastic food charity and food bank organization, tagging on some of our digital inclusion sessions with devices and data and skills at some of their food bank sites. And a lot of those users that came in were not aware of the existence of things like social tariffs. I think nearly 70% weren't when we surveyed them. So again, there's a take-up issue because of promotion and awareness. But even when people are made aware, the telcos are saying that there's a very small take-up of social tariffs. And we don't quite know the reason why yet. We think, speaking to people anecdotally on the ground, that you know, a £5 to £10 social tariff per month is a great start, but when they have so many other issues going on that, let's just be blunt about it, is about costs that are, you know, way in excess of £5 to £10 a month. There's an argument for, will that make that much difference to, you know, make their books balance? So it's a help, but it's probably not the main solution in the mix.
Yes, and where we're still sort of seeing that gap is very much that signposting, that communications. Actually, we shouldn't talk about hard to reach people. It's a terrible term, but there are a lot of people who don't necessarily go where it would be most convenient for them to be told about some of the services that are available to them. And I think as a sector, actually, and whether that's government, whether it's charities, whether it's businesses, we need to be far better at actually telling people about services where they are, where they want to go, rather than expecting that people will go to somewhere where we feel that's the right place for them to find out about help that's available. Just a quick shout out to the attendees. Great to see some questions coming through on the chat. Do make sure you're putting them in the Q&A part at the bottom of the screen, mainly for my convenience, so I'm not scrolling up and down the chat while we're talking to Matt, trying to find them. So Matt, we've talked about the huge importance of connectivity. Do you think that actually digital inclusion services can ever be carried out effectively if we don't crack this connectivity element?
No, I mean, mentioned it already, but I think it's worth saying again. I think we're big believers, as I'm sure a lot of people are here today, that you have to join those three kind of pillars of digital inclusion up, if you like. And I remember even when we were getting into the sector 10, 12 years ago, I was kind of taught or, told by many, many people that I've always remembered that the three pillars of digital inclusion really are the skills side, the equipment, and the internet access. And it was one of the interesting things during COVID, actually, that we saw sort of stepping back was that, initially there was huge focus on the equipment side. So it was all about, probably as you saw from the Cabinet Office and central government, sort of let's just get the laptops out there to kids in schools and people in need. But it was interesting because when you actually look at the detail of some of those programs, fantastically impactful. But when we started to speak to some of those organizations, they said, the laptops are going out, but there's nothing on the data side. And so then the next wave, I think it was, one of the third or fourth lockdowns probably, there was this then huge campaign from the telco companies to do data banks, data SIM giveaways. And that's been fantastic. But again, we then saw the same feedback, which was, right, they've got data and they've got the equipment, but have they been booked in with a trainer or a volunteer or a digital champion or someone? And that piece hadn't been looked at. So it was just quite interesting stepping back that I think kind of with the big sort of need and cry for help during COVID and post-COVID, we've kind of rushed to look at each one individually, which, quite rightly, it was up against a lot of pressure during COVID. But I think now there's definitely a lot of debate about how can we link it all together. Only last week I was with Greater Manchester Combined Authority and all the 10 councils, and they said, on some of the data SIM programs, they're literally using staff to stuff the SIMs into envelopes, and then go to a spreadsheet of their residents and post them out. It's very, very manual. So I think joining it all together and looking at sort of the management of that, I think will have a greater impact. But yes, I think you can't have true digital inclusion without all of those three things being put together, which of course one is connectivity, but I think it's just not the only one. I think maybe just last point on that to say is that we constantly see this the multifaceted issues. So whether someone is having mental health difficulty, maybe they're unemployed, so there's an employability issue. And when you combine all of that together with age, geography, income, skill levels, the welfare needs, it becomes this big spider's web where actually the needs of the users are very varied. And so we spend a lot of our time thinking about, well, how can that amazing variety of people come into sort of a single front door, as it's called? And probably the other side to that is a lot of discussion about channel of choice. So again, brilliant things available across the UK, but one thing that's right for one person may not be right for another. So again, we provide all of the different channels through our community partners because we think that's the right thing to do. But the variety honestly continues to amaze me of how you'll have someone that's very comfortable walking to the local centre. So that's where physical centres come in. But for someone else, they may can't think of anything worse than perhaps going into a local library, and they'd rather be at home and have someone come into them, remotely and digitally. So I think, remembering that people have that variety of need, and organizing the programs, I think, in a way where you can offer that variety in one place. It's quite difficult to do. It's quite challenging, but we think that probably has the highest impact on individuals in the end.
Really interesting. And that choice piece is really so fundamental. Again, we make a lot of assumptions that people, potentially in quite small communities, are happy to go into somewhere and say, hi everyone, I can't afford the internet and I don't know how it works. And actually, you get a lot of quite private people who may not want to, or may not feel comfortable or confident doing that. And we shouldn't assume that, well, you'll have to get over that. No, we need to make sure that there is a menu of opportunities so that people can access things,
yes,
not just how they need to, but actually how they want to as well. It's 2023 in the UK. Having therefore covered that connectivity probably is pretty essential and does indeed need to be universal, how do we fix this, Matt? How do we help to integrate internet access and data connectivity into existing digital inclusion programs? Do you have that magic answer?
Well, I think, I wouldn't sit here and pretend that we have one silver bullet or magic answer. I think our take really, perhaps just to, finish with reiterating our kind of need or want to bring it all together. That's where we think, from the community programs we look at least across the UK, that's where the most impact will come from. So we kind of use an analogy that what we want to do is build a better airport. We don't want to fly the planes. The reason we talk about that a bit is that when you look at the sector, and I'm sure 75 odd organizations are here today, we think there's enough resource and skills out there in the organizations on the ground that are doing this work. We don't think that more supply is needed on that side, if you will. Again, I think there's 160,000 charities in the UK, 400 new ones start up every month. There's armies of volunteers. There's 10,000 organizations that are independent, not part of a sort of network. And then you've got all the fantastic networks, again, like Education's Advice, Library Service, and so forth. So we kind of think actually there's enough people out there to do the good, to support people on this issue. But I think it's the way it's organized. That's sort of one of the maybe light bulb moments we've come to our organization, is that you go into these communities, and I'd be interested in the people on the chat if they find this same issue, that when we go in and talk to people, they'll be aware of maybe something that's going on right there, but they won't know maybe something that's going on in a neighboring borough or community. They may not know about national services going on from either charities, corporates, the government, and so forth. We run, I think someone's just put it out on the chat, but just for instance, we run a couple of helplines for Lloyds Bank and Vodafone that are completely free for users. And right now on those programs, anyone in this webinar and anyone across the UK, you can put someone forward and they'll get a tablet, prepaid SIM data, and up to 6 hours of digital skills training totally for free. And when we say that to people, they go, wow, I didn't know that was out there. And so that's one way that people like Lloyds Bank and Vodafone are trying to give back. But I think there's this sort of awareness issue of, because it's not all joined up, people don't know those types of helpline schemes are there, and that's funded, it's free. So please, people are welcome to utilize that for the communities you work with. So yes, I think that's really our big takeaway, is that we think it needs to be joined up. There's a more collaborative approach to put all this together, so it stops individuals having to be pulled from pillar to post, that joins up all the organizations under one roof. To help that, we have developed and are building a welfare technology platform that helps to sort of join those dots together, and can actually be the kind of infrastructure, if you like, for that airport. And maybe just one other sort of request to finish with is to help us build this out and work out how things can be joined up in a better, more efficient way. We've set up an impact council, as we call it, with 40 or 50 initial organisations from across a wide variety of sectors across the UK to help co-design and build, you know, in a sense for you guys, for the sector, you know, what is it you think we need? What are the holes? What are the gaps? What are the issues? So we can kind of build it together. So, you know, we definitely request if people want to join that. We have kind of quarterly meetings where we talk about these issues and how can we build something better for society. And, you know, people are very welcome to join that.
Fantastic, Matt. Thank you for sharing all of that. I can see actually one of the questions we've come in is just how people could access that amazing tablet data and training offer. So I'm hoping someone on the We Are Digital team might just be able to pop some details in the chat so that people can find out a bit more about that.
Sure, thank you.
We just have a very few minutes to rattle through some of the Q&As because we do have a program today, as I said. So we'll kick off with Will, who has asked actually quite a fundamental question. How difficult is it going to be to ensure universal internet access is seen as a basic human right when other traditional utilities and needs, housing, electricity, gas, food banks, still aren't seen in that way?
Yeah, I saw that, and it's I'm just loading up now. Yeah, it's a good question. Thanks, Will. I think I mean, I think kind of what you're saying, not to play that back or put words in your mouth, is that almost there are so many other issues going on, and especially in the cost of living, as I mentioned before, that you know, how can one thing be solved over another? I think, I mean, our take at the moment, well, and we probably haven't got a special single answer to this, is that we're trying to work a lot with government at the moment. I do think there can be power in policy changes. So one thing we're trying to bring to the government, and this is, you know, whoever gets in next year, the general election, you know, we just see it as the central government has a job to do this, basically, is a kind of what we're calling a universal business case. So where universal internet access fits in, but it's just one strand of lots of other things going on in business and in society, to do with, you know, income, health. You know, there's a lot of talk at the moment about the switch off of the TV, sort of cable TV side, and moving to online streaming and so forth. So there's kind of so many parts to this. We're trying to bring it all under one roof to influence policymakers. I know some of our team, alongside other people in the digital inclusion sector, at the House of Commons today and Houses of Parliament, talking about this. I know a lot of people can be skeptical on, you know, what will politicians ever do sometimes in certain difficult areas, but we are seeing on both Labour and Conservative side actually a lot of buy-in to meet us and other organisations about this. And there is some talk of potentially some quite big changes. So yes, I'd say it's very tricky. You're completely right that many other needs are not met. And so, you know, they need to get just as much focus on this as the internet conundrum. But I think a lot can be done through policy change, although it does take a bit of time.
And I think just to reiterate on that, well, we do live in a world where housing is perceived as essential. The crisis may not have been dealt with, but the perception is there that it's essential. Food, everyone knows it's essential. Electricity,
yeah.
Gas, the knowledge is there, the perception is there. No one would ever question it. Internet access, some people in society still go, oh, well, you can manage without it. Or, oh, well, is it essential? Is it a luxury poverty, as I've heard it termed? And that's the first step, is that we have to change that understanding and perception to stop thinking of the internet as something that people could manage without if they have to.
Yes, yeah.
A really interesting question from Julian, which is that with the PSTN switch off, so this is the copper lines switch off that Openreach particularly are driving forward in December 2025, how much more of an impact for particularly accessing public services do you think those particularly relying on landlines might see as a result.
Yeah, I just saw that question. Thanks, Julian. Yeah, I mean, and bear in mind with this answer that I don't pretend to be a telco technical specialist on some of this side, but yes, I do know what you're referring to. And we do work with some of the big telcos as well as some of the fast growth alt nets, as they call them, so community fiber, city fiber, so forth. I think it's a difficult one. I mean, we started our life as a company about 10, 12 years ago, just helping older individuals, older citizens in their home. And I always remember, because I was kind of the first trainer at our organization, going into people's homes and fixing up broadband through their landline. And yes, there's a lot of debate at the moment on whether landlines are really needed, because I think the statistics are, a tiny percentage of people still use them for actually making calls. So yes, I think probably this will be helped with the sort of upshot in the fast growth alt nets and some of the Openreach rollout that continues to go on to get fiber to direct to the property. And so we can hopefully in time bypass the need for landlines. We've seen quite a few communities, although this tends to be in bigger cities like Birmingham and London, where they're using basically a router through their 5G mobile broadband connection, and they're getting kind of quite a good tariff on that. So just bypassing the need to have the landline at all. Satellite does that as well. So I think, our take when there's ever a switch off, because we've been involved in that before, and this happened many years ago with the big move towards cable TV and the sort of digital switch off from analog on that side, was we believe on two sides, basically. On the one side, you need to make sure that if the technology is kept up, you can move enough of the country onto some of those things, as it were, fiber to the property, satellite, 5G only, data plans through mobile connections. But at the same time, you have to put in place something to support. I think the question's flicked off now, but I think was that you said 3% who still may have that need for a landline and support. And that's where assisted digital, we believe, comes in. So assisted digital, the statistics from the government, if you believe them, are that 1 to 10% of the UK would struggle with any type of switch off or switch over to digital in some way, not just internet, but other things like online forms and so forth. So in a similar way, yes, the government actually can't go digital by default until they've put a support service in for that 1 to 10%. So I would see that 3% in the same bucket, really, that you need to make sure when that happens in, I think was it 2025, you said, there's a support mechanism to help those in need at that point. Even though it's a small percentage of the UK, it'll still be a lot of people.
But it's a very interesting issue that I'm sure is going to start to gain more and more profile as we get closer to that switch off. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, and we have a number of really interesting questions. We should, anytime Matt talks to us, we should schedule a webinar for at least 2 hours, because so many people have so many things they'd love to ask you. If it's all right, we will share Matt's email so that people can get in touch direct and follow up on some of the questions that are still waiting to be answered, because there's some really interesting stuff in there. Just a reminder that it is End Digital Poverty Day today. So we are all about raising awareness. We're all about conversations. We're all about collaboration. And we have a packed agenda, and I'm dropping a link into the chat. So if you're not aware of what we've got coming up next, and I think our next webinar is in 15 minutes, you can see whether you've got a bit of time to jump onto one of those events. Do remember that there are lots of ways to keep this conversation going. It's not just a one-day event. We want to end digital poverty once and for all, and that's what we do every day of the week. So please do join our community hub. This is a place for exactly these kinds of conversations. Let's collaborate, let's come up with some new ideas. Please also take a look at our national delivery plan, which Matt referenced earlier on. This is a document, there's an overview. If you don't have time to look through everything and you just want to dive into sections that talks about 6 missions to end digital poverty once and for all, with a number of actions against that. And if you are interested in helping to take forward any of those actions, please reach out to us. We'd really love to hear from you. The DPA also couldn't do what we do without the kind support of the corporates, other charities and individuals who provide us with funding. So it'd be remiss, particularly on this End Digital Poverty Day, for me to not say, please do consider whether you can make a gift to support us, to make sure that no family is left offline by the end of the decade. Thank you again so much, Matt, for your time and insights today. I think it's been a really, really good session.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, everyone. Speak to you soon.
Thank you all so much. See you on the next webinar, I hope. Take care, everyone.